In the late 1960s, America was changing. The world was entering a new era of technology, freedom, and progress. California, especially the San Francisco Bay Area, had become a symbol of hope, opportunity, and the future. But while millions of people were dreaming about a brighter tomorrow, a nightmare was quietly taking shape in the shadows. A nightmare that would terrorize an entire nation, challenge the world's best investigators, and remain unsolved for more than half a century. This is not just the story of a serial killer. This is the story of a man who turned murder into a game, transformed fear into a weapon, and left behind one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. He didn't wear a mask every time. He didn't leave behind a clear motive. And most importantly, he never revealed his true identity. Through cryptic letters, bizarre ciphers, and brutal murders, he taunted police, mocked newspapers, and watched as an entire country desperately searched for answers. His victims were real. His crimes were real. But his face remains unknown even today. Who was the Zodiac Killer? How did he evade capture for decades? And could the truth still be hiding somewhere within the evidence? Tonight, we reopen one of the darkest and most fascinating mysteries in American history. Welcome to MystoReveal. There are serial killers, and then there are legends. Not legends because of what they achieved, but because of the fear they left behind. Fear that survived decades. Fear that outlived witnesses, detectives, investigators, and even entire generations. America has seen many killers throughout its history. Some were caught, some confessed, some died in prison. But one name continues to haunt the nation even today. A name that appears in documentaries, books, movies, podcasts, and endless internet discussions. A name that became larger than the crimes themselves. The Zodiac Killer, a murderer who didn't just kill people. He played games. He challenged police. He mocked investigators. He turned fear into entertainment. And most terrifying of all, nobody knows who he really was. Imagine waking up one morning and opening a newspaper only to discover a letter from a serial killer. A letter written in cold blood. A letter filled with symbols and codes. A letter claiming responsibility for murders that had shocked an entire region. Then imagine realizing that the killer is still free. Still watching, still writing. That was the reality for thousands of Americans during the late 1960s. To understand the Zodiac Killer, we first need to travel back in time. The year is 1968. America is changing rapidly. The Vietnam War dominates headlines. Political tensions are growing. Civil rights movements are transforming society. Young people are embracing a new culture. Music, freedom, and rebellion fill the air. California, especially the San Francisco Bay Area, has become a symbol of this new era. People saw California as a place of opportunity, a place where dreams came true, a place where the future was being created. Nobody knew that in the shadows, something else was being created as well. A nightmare. Northern California during the late 1960s was full of small towns, connected by lonely highways. At night, many of these roads became deserted. Teenagers often drove to remote locations to spend time, together away from parents and crowded cities. Quiet lovers' lanes existed throughout the region. These locations seemed peaceful, safe, private, but for a predator searching for victims, they offered something else: isolation. On the night of December 20th, 1968, two young people were enjoying what should have been an ordinary evening. 17-year-old David Faraday, 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen. Like many teenagers, they were simply spending time. Together, neither of them knew they were about to become part of one of the greatest criminal mysteries in American history. The couple parked near Lake Herman Road, a remote area between the cities of Benicia and Vallejo in California. The location was quiet, dark, perfectly ordinary. Then sometime before midnight, another vehicle approached. What happened next remains unclear. Investigators would later reconstruct the scene using evidence, but nobody truly knows the exact sequence of events. What they do know is horrifying. At some point, the killer forced the young couple out of their vehicle. David Faraday was shot. Betty Lou Jensen attempted to run. She never got far. The killer fired multiple rounds into her back. When police arrived, they found a brutal crime scene. Two young lives had ended. No robbery, no clear motive, no suspects, just violence. At first, investigators treated the murders as a tragic but isolated crime. Perhaps it was a jealous lover. Perhaps a random act of violence. Perhaps someone known to the victims. There was no reason to believe the murders would become famous. There was certainly no reason to believe a serial killer was responsible. The case remained unsolved. Weeks passed, then months. The killer remained invisible. For many investigators, Lake Herman Road slowly became another cold case. But the killer wasn't finished. Not even close. 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, another young couple found themselves alone in a parked car. This time the victims were 19-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 22-year-old Michael Majot. They were sitting inside a vehicle at Blue Rock Springs Park, another secluded location near Vallejo. It was late at night. The atmosphere felt normal. Then headlights appeared. A car approached. The driver stopped nearby. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the vehicle drove away. The couple probably felt relieved. Maybe it was just another person passing through. But only minutes later, the same vehicle returned. This time the driver got out. He approached their car carrying a flashlight. At first, the victims may have thought he was a police officer. The flashlight was pointed directly into the vehicle. Then gunfire exploded. Bullets shattered the night. Darlene Ferrin was struck multiple times. Michael Majot was hit repeatedly as well. The attacker briefly walked away. Then he returned and fired again. The violence was methodical, cold, deliberate. Unlike the first attack, however, something unexpected happened. One victim survived. Michael Majot was seriously wounded, but alive. For the first time, investigators had a witness. His description wasn't perfect. The attack happened quickly. It was dark. The shooter had approached unexpectedly. But Majot remembered important details. The attacker appeared heavyset, white, possibly between his mid-20s and early 30s. Not a detailed description, but better than nothing. Then something even stranger happened. Less than an hour after the attack, the Vallejo Police Department received a phone call. The caller calmly reported the crime. Then he made a shocking statement. He claimed responsibility, not only for the Blue Rock Springs attack, but also for the Lake Herman Road murders months earlier. The voice sounded calm, emotionless, almost casual, as if discussing the weather. The caller then hung up. Suddenly, two separate murder cases became connected. Investigators realized they might be hunting a serial killer, but they still had no idea who he was. Days later, newspapers across Northern California received nearly identical letters. The letters were disturbing. The writer claimed responsibility for both attacks. He included details that had never been released publicly. Details only the killer could know. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Each letter contained a section of a strange coded message, a cipher. The writer demanded that newspapers publish the codes on their front pages. If they refused, he threatened to kill again. Imagine being an editor receiving that letter. Do you publish the demands of a murderer? Or do you refuse and risk more deaths? The situation created a moral dilemma. Eventually, newspapers published the codes. And with that decision, the killer achieved exactly what he wanted. Attention. The entire region became obsessed. People stared at the strange symbols, letters, shapes, patterns. Everyone wanted to solve the mystery. Who was this killer? What did the code mean? And why was he communicating through newspapers? The cipher quickly became a public sensation. Amateur codebreakers across America attempted to solve it. Most failed. Then a schoolteacher named Donald Hardin and his wife, Betty Hardin, managed to crack a large portion of the message. The solution shocked investigators. The message read in part, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The words continued with disturbing references to collecting slaves for the afterlife. There was no clear identity hidden in the message. No confession explaining motives. No useful clues about who the killer actually was. Instead, the message revealed something else, a terrifying mindset. The writer appeared to enjoy fear itself. He wanted attention. He wanted power. He wanted the public to know he existed. Then, on August 4th, 1969, another letter arrived. This letter introduced a name that would become famous around the world. At the end of the message, the writer signed with a symbol, a circle crossed by vertical and horizontal lines. And beneath it, he wrote, "This is the Zodiac speaking." Just like that, a legend was born. The Zodiac. Nobody knows exactly why he chose that name. Some investigators believed it might relate to a watch brand that used a similar symbol. Others suggested astrological interests. Some thought it was simply a dramatic persona invented to frighten the public. Whatever the reason, it worked. The name sounded mysterious, powerful, almost supernatural. Newspapers loved it. Television stations repeated it endlessly. The public became fascinated. Every new letter became front-page news. Every new clue sparked fresh speculation. Meanwhile, detectives struggled to keep up. They were facing something unusual. Most serial killers try to avoid attention. Most murderers want to remain invisible. The Zodiac seemed different. He actively sought publicity. He wanted newspapers to print his messages. He wanted police to chase him. He wanted ordinary people to think about him. In many ways, he understood media attention better than investigators did. And that made him incredibly dangerous. As weeks turned into months, fear spread throughout Northern California. Parents worried about their children. Couples avoided isolated roads. Citizens became suspicious of strangers. Every unknown face suddenly seemed threatening. Every unexplained sound felt sinister. The Zodiac had accomplished something few criminals ever achieve. He had transformed himself into an idea. And ideas are much harder to catch than people. The mystery deepened further, because investigators could find almost nothing, linking the crimes to a specific suspect. No clear fingerprints, no reliable witness identification, no obvious motive, no connection between victims. It was as though the killer appeared from nowhere, committed murder, and vanished back into darkness. The public desperately wanted answers, but the more investigators searched, the fewer answers they found. And somewhere in California, the Zodiac was watching, reading newspapers, listening to reports, enjoying every moment of confusion. The game had only begun, and before long, the Zodiac would commit crimes so bizarre, so theatrical, and so chilling that his name would become permanently embedded in American history. The next phase of the story would transform him from a dangerous killer into one of the most infamous criminal masterminds the world has ever known. By the late summer of 1969, the Zodiac Killer had already achieved something most criminals never could. He had transformed himself into a public phenomenon. Newspapers discussed him daily. Television stations analyzed every letter. Police departments were overwhelmed with tips, theories, and false leads. Yet despite all the attention, nobody knew who he was. The Zodiac wasn't simply killing people anymore. He was controlling a narrative. Every new letter increased his fame. Every unanswered question increased his power. And then, just when investigators believed they were beginning to understand him, he changed the rules of the game. The date was September 27, 1969, a warm Saturday evening. The location was Lake Berryessa, a beautiful reservoir in Napa County, California. Unlike the lonely highways where his previous attacks had occurred, Lake Berryessa was a popular recreational area. Families visited during the day. Couples relaxed near the water. It was the kind of place where people went to escape stress and enjoy nature. 22-year-old Brian Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard were spending the afternoon there together. The weather was pleasant. The atmosphere was peaceful. Nothing seemed unusual. Then they noticed a man approaching. At first he appeared strange, but not necessarily dangerous. As he came closer, however, the couple realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The man was wearing an extraordinary costume. A black executioner's hood covered his head. Dark clothing covered his body. Most disturbing of all was a symbol displayed prominently on his chest. A white crosshair symbol. The same symbol that appeared on Zodiac letters. The same symbol newspapers had printed repeatedly. The same symbol becoming associated with terror across California. For the first time, a victim was looking directly at the Zodiac Killer. Unlike previous attacks, this wasn't a sudden ambush. This wasn't gunfire from the darkness. This was personal. The hooded figure approached calmly. He claimed to be an escaped prisoner. He said he needed money and a vehicle. Brian Hartnell later recalled that the man spoke in a controlled, almost rehearsed manner. He didn't seem nervous. He didn't seem emotional. He sounded prepared. The conversation continued for several minutes. Then the situation escalated. The man ordered the couple to lie on the ground. He used pre-cut lengths of clothesline to bind them. At first, they believed they might survive. After all, robbery seemed to be the goal. That assumption proved tragically wrong. Without warning, the hooded man produced a knife. What followed was one of the most brutal attacks in the Zodiac case. The killer stabbed both victims repeatedly, again and again. The violence was horrifying. Yet even after inflicting such injuries, the Zodiac wasn't finished. Before leaving, he walked to Brian Hartnell's car. Using a black marker, he wrote a message directly onto the vehicle's door. The message included dates of previous Zodiac attacks. Then he added the current date. It was essentially a signature, a public declaration, a trophy. The killer wanted anyone who found the vehicle to know exactly who had committed the crime. Think about how unusual that behavior was. Most murderers hide evidence. Most criminals avoid drawing attention. The Zodiac did the opposite. He advertised his crimes. He wanted recognition. He wanted credit. He wanted fear. Hours later, authorities discovered the victims. Miraculously, Brian Hartnell survived. Cecilia Shepard initially survived as well, but despite medical treatment, she later died from her injuries. Another victim had been added to the growing list. Another family had been shattered. And yet investigators had gained something important. A survivor. A witness. For the second time, someone had seen the Zodiac Killer and lived to describe him. The descriptions varied slightly from earlier accounts, but certain patterns emerged. The Zodiac appeared to be a white male, heavy-set, broad-shouldered, possibly between 25 and 40 years old. Not enough information to identify him, but enough to create a rough profile. Still, the killer remained invisible. Then, just when investigators were processing the Lake Berryessa attack, the Zodiac struck again, only 2 weeks later, October 11, 1969, San Francisco. Unlike previous crimes, this attack happened inside a city. Not a remote lover's lane, not a rural lake, a busy urban environment. The victim was Paul Stein, a 29-year-old taxi driver. Near midnight, Stein picked up a passenger. An ordinary fare, or so it seemed. At some point during the ride, the passenger produced a weapon. A single gunshot ended Paul Stein's life. What happened next would become one of the most frustrating moments in the entire investigation. Several witnesses observed the suspect. Teenagers looking from a nearby window saw the attack unfold. They immediately contacted police. And here, an extraordinary mistake occurred. Due to a communication error, officers received an incorrect suspect description. Instead of searching for a white male, some officers were told to look for a black suspect. That mistake may have changed history. One police officer later reported encountering a man who matched the eventual Zodiac description near the crime scene. Because of the incorrect information, however, the individual was not stopped, not questioned, not detained, simply allowed to continue walking. Imagine the possibility. A police officer may have crossed paths with the Zodiac Killer minutes after a murder and unknowingly let him go. If true, it would become one of the greatest missed opportunities in criminal investigation history. But the mystery became even stranger. A few days after the murder, the Zodiac sent another letter. Inside was a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. The inclusion served one purpose: proof. The killer wanted investigators to know the letter was authentic. Only the murderer could possess that evidence. The message itself was chilling. The Zodiac mocked police. He laughed at their efforts. He claimed officers had almost caught him. Then he suggested future attacks. The tone wasn't fearful. It wasn't defensive. It was arrogant, almost playful. The Zodiac seemed to enjoy humiliating law enforcement, and every new letter increased public fascination. By now, California was experiencing something unprecedented. The Zodiac wasn't just a criminal. He was becoming a celebrity, a dark celebrity. People discussed him at dinner tables. Students talked about him in schools. Radio programs analyzed his messages. Newspapers competed to publish the latest developments. The killer understood exactly how to manipulate media attention, and he used that knowledge brilliantly. As investigators dug deeper into the letters, they discovered something fascinating. The Zodiac didn't merely enjoy violence. He enjoyed puzzles, codes, games, control. Some letters contained complex ciphers. Others contained bizarre symbols. Many included cryptic statements that seemed designed to confuse investigators. One of the most famous examples became known as the 340 cipher, named after its length of 340 characters. The coded message baffled experts for decades. Professional cryptographers tried solving it. Government analysts examined it. Amateur codebreakers spent years studying it. Nobody could crack it. The cipher became one of the greatest unsolved puzzles in criminal history. For more than 50 years, it resisted every attempt at interpretation. The Zodiac would likely have enjoyed that fact, because confusion was part of his strategy. The less people understood him, the more powerful he appeared. And yet, despite the mystery, investigators slowly began constructing a psychological profile. The Zodiac seemed intelligent, not necessarily a genius, but clearly above average. He followed news coverage closely. He understood public relations. He planned attacks carefully. He demonstrated patience. Perhaps most importantly, he appeared obsessed with recognition. Many serial killers commit crimes because of personal compulsions. The Zodiac seemed different. Attention itself appeared to motivate him. Fear became his currency. Publicity became his reward. The murders generated headlines. The letters generated legends. Together they created the Zodiac phenomenon. Meanwhile, police departments throughout California launched one of the largest investigations in state history. Thousands of suspects were considered. Thousands more tips were received. Fingerprints were collected. Handwriting samples were analyzed. Witness interviews multiplied. The workload became enormous. Yet despite years of effort, investigators remained stuck. And then one name began attracting attention: Arthur Lee Allen. Allen would eventually become the most famous Zodiac suspect. At first glance, there were reasons for suspicion. He lived in Northern California. He owned a Zodiac brand watch featuring a symbol similar to the killer's crosshair emblem. Several acquaintances reported disturbing statements allegedly made by Allen. Some even claimed he had discussed fantasies involving murder. The similarities were intriguing, perhaps even alarming, but suspicion is not evidence, and that's where the case became complicated. Over the years, investigators repeatedly examined Allen. They searched properties, collected fingerprints, compared handwriting samples, analyzed evidence. Yet critical problems remained. Fingerprints didn't match. Handwriting comparisons were inconclusive. DNA evidence failed to establish a definitive connection. The more investigators looked, the more uncertainty emerged. Was Allen the Zodiac? Or was he simply a strange man whose behavior created suspicion? Even today, opinions remain divided. Some investigators believed he was responsible. Others strongly disagreed. And Allen wasn't the only suspect. Far from it. Dozens of names emerged throughout the years. Some theories pointed toward military veterans. Others focused on teachers, engineers, police officers, and even multiple individuals working together. Each suspect seemed promising for a time. Then evidence would collapse. Contradictions would appear. Theories would fail. The Zodiac remained elusive. Part of the problem was the sheer amount of misinformation. As public interest exploded, rumors spread everywhere. People wanted answers. When answers failed to appear, speculation filled the gap. Conspiracy theories emerged. False confessions surfaced. Attention seekers inserted themselves into the investigation. Separating fact from fiction became increasingly difficult. The Zodiac case was no longer just a criminal investigation. It had become a cultural phenomenon. And cultural phenomena create noise. A lot of noise. For detectives, every false lead consumed valuable time. Every incorrect theory diverted resources. Every sensational headline complicated the search for truth. Yet despite the confusion, one fact remained undeniable. The Zodiac Killer was real. Real victims, real families, real tragedies. Behind the headlines and puzzles stood lives permanently destroyed by violence. That reality sometimes became lost amid public fascination. But investigators never forgot. Because every unsolved case represented unanswered questions. Every unidentified suspect represented unfinished work. And every Zodiac letter represented another reminder that the killer had escaped justice. As the 1970s began, the Zodiac's communication patterns changed. The letters continued, but less frequently, the attacks appeared to stop. Or at least, confirmed attacks. This created a new mystery. What happened to the Zodiac? Did he die? Did he move away? Did he continue killing under a different identity? Or had he simply decided the game was over? Nobody knew, and perhaps that uncertainty was exactly what he wanted. Because mysteries survive, mysteries linger, mysteries refuse to disappear. By now, investigators had accumulated mountains of evidence, countless theories, and a growing list of suspects. Yet the central question remained unanswered. Who was the Zodiac Killer? And as the decades passed, new technologies, new forensic techniques, and new discoveries would reopen the case again and again. But instead of bringing clarity, many of these developments would make the mystery even deeper, leading investigators into one of the most controversial and fascinating criminal investigations in modern history. As the 1970s progressed, something strange began to happen. The Zodiac Killer, the man who had dominated headlines, terrified communities, mocked police departments, and turned murder into a twisted public spectacle, seemed to fade away. The letters became less frequent. The confirmed attacks stopped. The headlines slowly disappeared. America moved on. New crimes captured attention. New scandals filled newspapers. New fears replaced old ones. But one thing never changed. The Zodiac Killer had never been caught, and that fact continued to haunt investigators for decades. Most criminal cases follow a predictable path. A crime occurs. Evidence is collected. Suspects are identified. Arrests are made. Eventually, the story ends. The Zodiac case refused to follow that pattern. Instead, it evolved into something much larger. A mystery. A puzzle. A question that refused to die. For years, detectives continued searching for answers. New suspects appeared. Old theories were revisited. Evidence was re-examined repeatedly. But no matter how hard investigators worked, the same problem remained. There was never enough proof. Many suspects looked promising. Many theories sounded convincing. But none could fully explain everything. And that is what makes the Zodiac case so unique. Every suspect solves part of the mystery. None solve all of it. As technology improved during the 1980s and 1990s, investigators hoped science would finally succeed where traditional detective work had failed. Fingerprint analysis became more advanced. Computer databases expanded. Forensic science evolved dramatically. Then came DNA. Suddenly, cold cases around the world were being solved. Criminals who thought they had escaped justice for decades were being identified through microscopic, biological evidence. Hope returned. Perhaps the Zodiac's identity was hidden somewhere in the evidence all along. Perhaps modern science would finally reveal the truth. Investigators revisited envelopes sent by the Zodiac. They examined stamps. They analyzed saliva residue. They searched for genetic material. The results were frustrating. Some samples were incomplete. Others were contaminated. Many questions remained about whether the DNA actually belonged to the killer. Remember, the Zodiac letters passed through many hands. Mail carriers, police officers, laboratory technicians, newspaper employees. Any of them could have unintentionally introduced contamination. This meant even when DNA was recovered, investigators couldn't always trust it completely. The technology was powerful. The evidence was not. And so, once again, certainty remained out of reach. Meanwhile, one of the greatest mysteries in the case remained unsolved. The ciphers. For decades, cryptographers studied Zodiac codes. Some messages had been partially solved, others remained complete mysteries. The most famous unsolved code was the 340 cipher. For more than 50 years, it resisted every attempt at decryption. Professional codebreakers failed. Government analysts failed. Mathematicians failed. Thousands of amateur investigators failed. The cipher became legendary. Then, in 2020, something extraordinary happened. A team of independent codebreakers finally cracked it. After half a century of mystery, the hidden message was revealed. The world waited. Perhaps the code contained the Zodiac's identity. Perhaps it revealed his location. Perhaps it explained his motives. Instead, the message was deeply unsettling. The decoded text largely consisted of rambling statements about not fearing death and references, similar to ideas found in earlier Zodiac letters. There was no confession, no real name, no address, no definitive clue. Even after 50 years, the Zodiac had managed to protect his identity. The solution answered one question while creating another. Why spend so much effort creating complex codes if they revealed almost nothing useful? The answer may lie within the Zodiac's personality. Many experts believe the codes were never truly about communication. They were about power. Imagine the satisfaction the Zodiac must have felt knowing thousands of people were spending hours, days, even years trying to understand him. Every unsolved cipher kept him relevant. Every failed attempt increased his legend. The mystery itself became part of the crime. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating questions in the entire case. Who was the Zodiac Killer psychologically? What kind of person commits murders, writes letters, creates ciphers, and then watches the world obsess over his actions? Criminal profilers have studied this question for decades. Most agree on several characteristics. The Zodiac likely craved attention. Not ordinary attention. Public attention. Recognition. Importance. Many experts believe he wanted to feel powerful in a way his ordinary life never allowed. Think about it. Nobody knew his real name. Nobody knew his face. Yet entire cities feared him. Governments discussed him. Newspapers published his words. Police departments dedicated enormous resources to hunting him. For a person obsessed with significance, that level of influence would have been intoxicating. Some profilers believe the Zodiac enjoyed the letters more than the murders themselves. The murders created fear. The letters allowed him to experience it. Each newspaper headline became proof of his power. Each public warning became confirmation of his influence. Each failed investigation reinforced his superiority. In many ways, the Zodiac may have been fighting two battles simultaneously, one against his victims and another against society itself. But perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that he succeeded. Because even today, more than half a century later, people are still talking about him, still investigating, still debating, still searching. Very few criminals achieve that level of immortality. And yet, despite all the mystery, one enormous misconception continues to surround the Zodiac Killer. Many people imagine him as some kind of criminal mastermind, a genius, a superhuman strategist. The reality is probably much different. The Zodiac made mistakes, many mistakes. He left fingerprints, he communicated repeatedly. He exposed himself to witnesses. He took unnecessary risks. The reason he escaped justice wasn't necessarily because he was brilliant. Sometimes history is shaped by luck. Bad luck for investigators, good luck for criminals, communication errors, limited forensic technology, witness uncertainty, evidence contamination, timing, circumstances. All of these factors may have played a role. The Zodiac wasn't invisible because he was perfect. He may simply have existed during a time when catching him was extraordinarily difficult, and that realization makes the case even more frustrating. Because if the crimes happened today, there's a strong chance the outcome would be very different. Modern surveillance cameras, cell phone tracking, DNA databases, digital communication analysis, license plate readers, advanced forensic techniques. The modern world leaves traces everywhere. The Zodiac operated in a different era. An era where disappearing was easier. An era where mistakes could remain hidden forever. As years became decades, the Zodiac transformed from an active criminal investigation into a cultural phenomenon. Books were written, movies were produced, documentaries explored every theory imaginable. One of the most famous examples was the film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher. The movie introduced millions of people to the case. A new generation became fascinated by the mystery, and once again, interest exploded. Online communities formed. Amateur investigators examined evidence. Independent researchers proposed theories. Some believed the mystery was close to being solved. Others believed it never would be. The internet created a strange situation. Thousands of people were now investigating the Zodiac simultaneously. Some discoveries were valuable. Others were completely misleading. The line between evidence and speculation became increasingly blurred. Yet despite all the confusion, one truth remained clear. The Zodiac had become more than a killer. He had become a symbol of unanswered questions, a symbol of human curiosity, a symbol of how deeply mysteries affect us. And perhaps that is why the case remains so compelling. Humans dislike uncertainty. We want endings. We want explanations. We want justice. The Zodiac case offers none of those things. It simply leaves us staring into darkness, waiting for answers that may never come. Today, official investigations continue in various forms. Cold case units still review evidence. Researchers still analyze letters. New forensic technologies continue emerging. Every few years, a new suspect captures headlines. Every few years, people believe the mystery is finally solved. And every few years, those hopes fade. The case survives. The questions survive. The legend survives. But perhaps the most important thing to remember is this. Behind every theory, every documentary, every cipher, and every headline were real people. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, Paul Stein. Families lost loved ones, friends lost companions, lives ended long before they should have. Sometimes the mystery becomes so fascinating that people forget the tragedy. The Zodiac wanted attention. History gave it to him. But the victims deserve to be remembered as well. Because without them, there would be no story, no mystery, no legend. Only ordinary lives that should have continued. And maybe that is the final lesson hidden inside the Zodiac case. Not every mystery has an ending. Not every question receives an answer. Sometimes history leaves gaps. Sometimes truth disappears. Sometimes the shadows win. Yet humanity continues searching. Because curiosity is stronger than uncertainty. Because questions demand answers. Because somewhere deep inside us, we believe every mystery can eventually be solved. The Zodiac Killer may still be the most famous unidentified serial killer in American history. Or perhaps one day, a forgotten piece of evidence, a new scientific breakthrough, or a tiny overlooked clue will finally reveal the truth. Until that day arrives, the Zodiac remains exactly what he always wanted to be. A puzzle, a ghost, a name without a face, a killer without an identity, a mystery without an ending. And perhaps the most terrifying part of all is that someone, somewhere, knew exactly who the Zodiac Killer was. Channel outro. But what do you think? Was the Zodiac Killer one of the major suspects investigators focused on for decades? Or is the real killer someone whose name has never appeared in public? Let us know your theory in the comments below. If you enjoy exploring the darkest mysteries, unsolved crimes, hidden truths, ancient secrets, and the unknown corners of history, then you're in the right place. This is MystoReveal, where mysteries aren't just told, they're uncovered. Until the next revelation, stay curious. Keep questioning everything, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying secrets are the ones that were never meant to be found.